the Never Stop Reading Bible. And today we're doing a deep dive into a selection of Psalms.
Yeah, specifically Psalms 11 through 15 today.
Exactly. And our guide for this is material from the Bible Guide.
Right. Good stuff there.
So our mission really is to unpack the core insights from these 5 Psalms. What do they tell us about faith, about struggle, and finding refuge when things feel like they're falling apart?
A very relevant theme, always.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive in with Psalm 11. This one feels quite personal, like a moment of intense threat.
It really does. The context, well, it's widely thought to be David, maybe facing persecution from Saul. His life's genuinely on the line.
And you get that tension straight away, don't you? His friends are basically saying, look around, run, flee like a bird to your mountain.
Yeah, verses 1 to 3, it's that practical advice based on a pretty grim reality. They're saying, the foundations are destroyed. What can the righteous possibly do?
It's that temptation to just react to the circumstances.
Exactly. But David's response is the core insight here. He refuses to let that visible reality dictate his faith.
He says, in the Lord I take refuge.
Right. Instead of fleeing based on sight, he declares his trust that God's still enthroned, still sees everything, and will ultimately bring justice. That's verses 4 to 7.
So refuge isn't about escape. It's about trusting God's character, even when you can't see the way out.
That's it. Powerful stuff.
Okay, so from that personal crisis, Psalm 12 then shifts focus. It feels more communal.
Definitely. It's a community lament. And wow, it paints a pretty stark picture of society. Corruption, deceit, everywhere. Verses 1 to 4 really lay that out.
It talks about flattering lips and boastful tongues.
Yes, and how wickedness feels so widespread, like trustworthiness has just vanished. The lament is about that pervasive lack of integrity.
You can almost feel the despair seeing society decay like that.
You really can. But then the psalm pivots. It moves from exposing all that evil to emphasizing the absolute certainty of God stepping in for the needy.
And the trustworthiness of God's words.
Exactly. Unlike deceitful human words, God's promises are pure, utterly reliable, like silver refined 7 times, it says in verses 5 to 8. That's where the community finds its hope.
Okay, Psalm 13. This one feels intensely personal again, almost raw.
Oh, absolutely. You feel David's exhaustion. Relentless persecution, enemies constantly after him. It's that desperate cry, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?
That hits hard.
It does. And what's fascinating is the structure, like a journey in 3 parts. It starts with that intense lament, feeling forgotten, verses 1 and 2.
Right, then it moves, doesn't it? It becomes a plea.
Exactly. Verses 3 and 4 are a direct plea for God to look, to answer, to save him. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death.
And then the ending. It changes tone completely.
It does. Verses 5 and 6, without any sign the circumstances have actually changed yet, burst into praise and trust in God's unfailing love, his hence.
So the insight isn't necessarily problem solved, but that trust and praise can happen within the struggle itself.
Precisely. It transforms the lament. Amazing.
Okay, next up, Psalm 14. This one, you mentioned it's similar to another song.
Yeah, it shares a lot of content with Psalm 53. It's another lament. But this time it's the grief of God's people looking at a world, acting as if God doesn't matter.
The fool says in his heart, there is no God, verse 1.
Right. And it's not just like theoretical atheism.
Right.
It's a practical living as if God isn't real kind of thing. And the psalm shows how that leads to corrupt actions, especially towards God's people.
And you said this one digs deeper than just the effects of evil.
Yes, I think this is key. Psalm 14 points to the essence, the origin of that evil. It's rooted in that internal denial there is no God. That's the source, according to the psalm, that leads to the corruption and the inability to seek God or do good, described in verses 1 to 3.
So it's connecting worldview directly to action.
Absolutely. And then, like the others, it contrasts this bleak picture with the future hope God's presence, with the righteous and the eventual victory and restoration through his judgment. Verses 4 to 7.
Okay, finally, Psalm 15. The language here, tent of Yahweh, gives us a historical clue.
It likely does, yeah. It probably places its writing sometime after the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem, but before Solomon built the permanent temple.
And it asks that big question. Who can dwell in God's sacred tent? Who can live on his holy mountain?
Exactly. And the rest of the psalm basically outlines the answer. It lists the spiritual and moral character traits needed for someone fit to worship, to be in God's presence.
Things like walking blamelessly, doing right, speaking truth.
Right, that's verses 2 and 3, but it's not just internal attitudes.
No, it gets very practical, specific actions.
Very specific. Don't slander. Do no evil to your neighbor. Keep your oath even if it hurts. Don't take a bribe. That's verses 3 to 5.
So the takeaway is that drawing near to God isn't separate from how you live your life day to day. It demands integrity, justice.
That's it precisely. A life that reflects God's character. And remember, this deep dive was guided by material from the Bible Guide.
And special thanks to the Center Studio.